Welcome, everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept, and we're holding a conference next year in Dubai if anyone's interested in finding out more, and of course, our membership is open to everyone. In this session, we welcome Jonathan Burton and Madhuri Das Woudenberg for a presentation titled Building Social Capital Through Mentoring Programs at the Goa School in India. Jonathan is an advisor to the Goa School and has orchestrated hundreds of mentoring and capacity building interventions throughout his career, empowering communities, building international solidarity and understanding. Today, he onboards new mentors to the Goa School and follows their work, in addition to working as part of an advisory group reporting to the board members of the Goa School Trust. Jonathan lives and works in Geneva in Switzerland. And Madhuri is founding director of the Goa School and brings 20 plus years of experience and connections from an international career in communications for sustainable development to each program at the Goa School, where she curates spellbinding mentoring and learning experiences for young Indian changemakers, designed to help them pursue compassionate and fulfilling lives. Madhuri lives and works in Goa, India, for a large part of the year. So we're delighted you have agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Jonathan and Madhuri, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting today. And, we know that we all become who we are based on the social relationships that we have and that we're a part of. And so this is the thinking that we have behind the programs we run at the Goa School. And what we thought was today we'd bring you a bit of our experiences through the practice end of things on building social capital. So I shall launch right into it. We are based in India, which, as you know, is a country that's beset with inequities. And we've got some stats up there to show you that, when the World Bank, for instance, describes inequity in India, it does it in financial terms. And it also says, for example, that the top 10% of wage income is about 13 times higher than the bottom 10, and this in the last year or so, 23, 24. So this obviously translates into education, into access to health, and things like that. So you do have more or less two Indias. One India that has everything in terms of social security, in terms of access to good services, a good income, social mobility, things like that. And then you have this other part of India that doesn't have most of these things, right? And we also have a terrible, a sort of like a caste, a social class system that tends to have many people growing up with the idea, youngsters especially, that they are in some way lesser human beings and that they can't access the best of development and what India's growth has to offer them. And it is these struggling youth that we try and target with our programs. And as a famous economist, Naila Kabir often talks about empowerment, and she says, is it really a choice if you can't actually imagine what your options are? And so I would say that the Goa School is actually in the business of showing those options to people who come from difficult backgrounds and asking them to then participate in their own ability to then make choices and to grow from there. So if you look at the way we describe ourselves in terms of the solution that we're offering, we would call it creating greater equity of opportunity. So taking youth from difficult backgrounds, introducing them to transformative ideas, building a community of support around them, and also making sure that mentors and speakers and others come to us to share what they know. So in a way, it is a joining of these two communities that wouldn't otherwise possibly cross paths. So we design everything to make sure that we have quality conversations around ethics, around gender, democracy, human rights. All of these might be things that a lot of youngsters from difficult backgrounds tend to either never hear of or just gloss over because it's not important to their lives at the moment, where they're trying to pull themselves out of poverty and into a better life. So what tends to happen then is that youngsters, they get stuck in families where, um, through no fault of theirs, are working several jobs at the same time, for instance. So they will not be having those dining table conversations around, what we want to build together as either a family or a community or a country. So, so it is that gap that also that we are trying to fill and to help our fellows sort of develop the capacity to sort of renegotiate their environments and not to uncritically sort of accept everything. Um, we call these people change makers. They normally have a sense that something needs to change, but they don't quite know how and how to go about it. So we start from the position of recognizing that they have an intrinsic resilience because they do come from environments that have high physical, social, and psychological threats. But then to take them through very serious group work that allows them to confront that reality and then to go from there to actually nurturing their own strengths in terms of changing themselves and then changing their communities and changing the country at large, perhaps over time. Okay, so how do we do this? What we do is three or four things. So one is that we invite everyone to Goa and we put them into what we call an immersion program or a 5-day contact program. So we all live in the same house. It's a little bit like a big boss house. We sort of hire a place, everybody comes and stays there together. And we take them through learning that has to do with concepts around sustainable development. And we also do this group work that I mentioned earlier, which is really getting them to uncover their own limitations and and develop a sort of a path towards self-development. So there's that. And at the end of the 5 days, sorry, they go back to their own lives, right? So they will have come to Goa and now they go back to wherever they're from. We have people from Kashmir or Arunachal Pradesh, and for those who don't know India, these are fairly remote corners of the country, but also people from the poorer states who are, say, like Uttar Pradesh, and also the more developed states, say Tamil Nadu. And so everybody meets together, has this great, time discussing everything, and then they go back to their lives. And this is where we face quite a bit of a challenge, which is to keep them connected to us. Now, what we offer for up to a year when they go back is mentoring, and we introduce them to mentors who come from the first kind of India with all the connections and the social capital that you ought to have as a human navigating their way into life. And we connect them to one such mentor who has some sort of interest either in the ideas that the fellows already expressed or they're in the same location, etc., etc. And once we connect them, we get the fellows to focus on their own development goals and to get independent opinions from the mentors to forward their own plans. Um, and at the end of this, if they can stick out the program, then they graduate as fellows of the Goa School. And then they all join this other big group where all previous batches and mentors and everybody, we call it the Hive Mind. It's sort of like an alumni group. And it facilitates thinking, networking, etc., across various batches. And this year we've started something new, which is within the Hive Mind, we're offering tiny grants to fellows who can access this money to start with their change making propositions and see how they work out. Um, so that's something in the making. I didn't talk about this other third item on the list, which is high level talks. So every month we invite speakers who've got a bit of experience something related to the Sustainable Development Goals and or self-development, who then come and share their ideas, etc., etc. So the fellows then have a constant stream of good content to look at. And the other thing we do with the Hive Mind also is to keep posting things there, in terms of good news that they can emulate, or TED Talks and other things, etc. So that their smartphones, which are often an instrument that they use for, like, watching videos of Bollywood dance moves or cricket matches, they are actually then getting um, good verified information that they can follow up on and use to build a map for themselves. So these are the 4 big buckets, and that's how we do it. And I did mention before, we do have a range of key conversations. It changes a little bit because for every batch, we curate our specialists slightly differently. One of our goals is to get more and more people to give back to the community. And so, one day we'll have, say, someone who's doing farming in a sustainable way. And another time we might have someone talking about water bodies, and another time we might have someone talking about mental health, etc. But then we weave that together in a way that people understand about themselves, they understand about the rights of the others, they understand about their communities around them, and how they can actually tackle some of the community issues that are there. And then we actually, of course, we talk about the whole country. We talk about trust in government, we talk about voting, we talk about political participation, things like that. And then last but not least, we do talk about the planet, and we talk about philosophy, and we talk about what is it that we're doing on this planet, and should we not be saving the one home we have instead of fighting, etc., etc. And what are we doing with all this garbage and plastics and all of that. And then we also talk a little bit about philosophies of life, different religions, what they might have to offer, non-religious thoughts and ideas, what do agnostics believe, how do you do things like just de-stressing, for example, and or how do you practice gratitude, things like that. So it's a full range, and it's very intensive. And these key conversations start at that 5-day immersion program, but they carry on throughout throughout the 1-year mentoring, and after that, as part of the Hive as well. Okay, so that's what we do. Hopefully, what we're doing is helping people to understand, find their voice, sort of get them to tell their story, become aware of their rights, etc., etc. And we find that the immersion program is a big hit. Everybody loves it. For some of them, it's like their first flight they've ever taken in their lives. They come to Goa, which is typically seen as a holiday destination in India. So for a lot of out of people who come from different parts of the country, it's something that they could never possibly afford to do on their own. So they come here on an absolute high. They love it. They give us fabulous feedback, and we do our programs from, say, around 9 to 5. It's very immersive. We take them all over the place, and we're all tired, and we come back for the next day, often to find out that they've been up all night, right, partying and sort of understanding each other, getting to know each other, etc., etc. So the engagement is fabulous in those first 5 days, but it is much harder to keep the fellows engaged once they go back to their lives. And very often we find that they don't take full advantage of the mentorship program. And of course, we sort of do say that, listen, if you don't make at least 2 calls to your mentor in the month, there's something wrong, and then you can't graduate. But that's like rock bottom. I mean, really, they should have someone who's on call, who will be like, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. What do you think? Because the point is that in their own families, in their own environments, everyone's either too busy or doesn't have the capacity to imagine what the options could be, right? So we want to be able to offer them that, but that is something that we find very hard to do. Now, we do find that we have some gains around confidence building and all of that. I mean, those, when you ask, how are you doing and what did you gain from the program, people will say, self-development, confidence, and the conversations are amazing, and sustainability, etc. but there are bits which Jonathan will go into a little bit later, that where the uptake is a little bit low, and it's not for lack of trying, right, on our part. The other thing is that, because they come from the age group of 21 to 29 years, they're quite impressionable. So if a mentor is very impressive in some way, or is tall and confident and, so, those sort of mentors, they acquire sort of a fan following, the rest, may have a really good message, but, they fail to, quote unquote, impress the youngsters. And that, I mean, we've seen that. The other thing we've seen is that the mentors learn as much as the fellows. So, it's really not only about the fellows growing, but also about the mentors growing in their understanding of who are all these quote unquote invisible youngsters in India that we don't meet or we don't see in our everyday lives. So the learning is both ways. Um, Also, we use very little money for this. A lot of the I would say the people who contribute, they will contribute with free space. Sometimes people pay for our meals, things like that. We have people who come in and donate travel costs. So, it's something that it's very little. I mean, in the year, I'll do in the break and tell you what this is in US dollars. But I think if in euros, it would be like 1,000 euros for every immersion program that we have, which is not that much at all. So we think it's rather cost effective. This includes travel money and everything. And then, but what we're learning, of course, is that if we truly want to make sure that this is India giving back to its own country, and for us to really forge that gap that we're seeing, to forge a bridge across that gap, then it's imperative for us to raise more domestic resources and to get more and more Indians involved with this process. So that's where we're at the moment. And I wanted to, this is a representational picture of us while having dinner after one of our programs. And I've changed the name of the person we're talking about, but I'd like to tell you the story of Alicia, just to give you a sense um, of how we get people to think critically, right? So here was this girl who, she came to us from Bombay. Her father was a factory worker. She'd spent all this money in trying to set up like a wayside restaurant. And then COVID hit, and so she lost all her money, and she was like literally in the doldrums, and she didn't know what her next move was going to be. She applied for the program, and she came in telling us, I've got all this kitchenware that I don't know what to do with because, I've invested in it, and I don't know if I can ever go back to business because of COVID. And we launched actually in the middle of COVID, so that was something else. Um, but so she came to us and she was very quiet. And one of the problems was that she wasn't very conversant in English. We conduct everything in English simply because we have youngsters from all over the country, and we don't actually have a single unifying Indian language that everyone can understand. So we work in English. And so for her, it was quite hard. And so we had to set up somebody for her to buddy with and to really understand everything that we were talking about. And the one story that we want to tell you is that there was this world-renowned photographer who'd been into the interiors of India and who'd made photographs of, facilities in rural India where women were expected to give birth to their babies. And the photographs were just ghastly. I mean, they were like the inside of a barn, and like these metal objects, stirrups and things had gone rusted. And so it was just, terrible facilities. I mean, it caused quite a stir. And of course, the photographer had this great conversation. Everyone participated, but Lisha did not. She was silent, and we were like, we were worried about her because we were like, she doesn't seem to be participating. What's going on, etc., etc. And after that, we were moving into town because they had a project in town. They had to do some work there, and so we were all jumping into a car. And she jumped into our car, and she said, something, in my village, we are building our fourth temple, but we don't have a single facility for healthcare for women who are bringing babies into this world. And, for us, it was like, okay, she gets it. She absolutely 100% gets it. And so for us, that was just absolutely beautiful to see. And so, people react in different ways. They don't automatically become people who, begin to participate and become so active and sort of demand rights and all of that, but they begin to think critically for themselves, right? And so for us, that was a marvelous thing. But of course, when she went back home, it was very hard to stay in touch with her. And every time we got in touch, the mentor would literally come to us in tears and say, she has a different plan every time I call her, so it's difficult to ask her what it is she wants to do, and she had a new, etc., etc. Well, anyway, there were 2 3 years into this. I mean, way past the time we were going to mentor her, we did discover that she was into waste management, and she was very keen on getting young girls get organized around their menstrual hygiene. So a success story in that sense. But yes, difficult for us to to say that it was a result of what we did, but also it certainly wasn't thanks to any bond that we created with her, because she went away from that program and did not really keep up with the mentoring uh, in an ideal way. So, so as you can see, we've had pluses and minuses in the program, and there are limits to the changes that we can expect. And we do hear about fellows going back to sort of older ways of thinking. Somebody else in the program, I remember him telling us, "Oh, I think I'm just going to get married." We were like, "Oh, have you found someone?" They were like, "No, no, we'll find somebody, but I want my mom to retire. And once I get married, then my wife can do all the housework." And we were just like, okay, we that's exactly the sort of patriarchal thinking that we want to get you away from, and we discussed it to death. So why should this be a response? But people do, they go back to their old ways of thinking, and that tends to happen. And another thing we see is that, people talk about sustainability, but then the sense of consumption is really, really high. So, and for a lot of the young people who want to be able to prove themselves as a brave new world, they like to look good, they like to present themselves well on social media, have the latest phone and that sort of thing. But are they really changing practices to become, a more sustainable, to live more sustainable lifestyles, which is what we also bang on about? We don't know if that happens. So, sowing the seeds is what we're doing. But what we'd love to have is a sort of a quick 10-minute break here before Jonathan comes on, um, and ask everyone attending to tell us how they think we can strengthen the bonds between fellows and mentors, and also between fellows and fellows, which is what we're keen on. Because if this social capital building is to be a success, then those are the bits that need to also work really well. So, question.
All right, so feel free to either raise your hand, which you'll find under the React button within Zoom, or you can post in the chat. And if you're not in a position to ask the question yourself, please let me know, and I'll be happy to read out the question on your behalf, or your comment, or your answer to this particular question. So I think, I think this question, if I could start first, I think that this question is something that we're struggling with in the social capital field. And I hear people talking about this all the time, because quite often even people who are supposed experts in building social capital often forget to maintain those connections with the people who they really want to and should be maintaining the connection with. And we're asking ourselves why. Why is it that we often don't reach out and maintain and strengthen those bonds? And there aren't easy answers to those questions. What I've seen perhaps work fairly effectively is try to get people to connect with the importance and the value of maintaining those connections. And that might help them to be a little bit more conscious and a bit more deliberate about how they maintain those relationships. But even so, we get busy. It's easy just to think the other person's doesn't have time for me, or I shouldn't reach out, or now's not the right time, and just push it off until later. And the only thing that I've really come across is trying to really instill in people the importance and value of it. But that doesn't always work.
Mhm. Yeah. I'd agree there. So
I think I saw another hand up.
we have come up. Sorry.
I think I saw another hand up, so maybe we can get some of the questions or the pointers out first, and then we can respond to them. Yes, Matthew.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Very good.
Shoot.
Hi there. I'm chipping in from Luxembourg, back in Europe. So thanks, Madhuri, for your input so far. And it's always I'm a job coach as a profession, so I help people integrate the first labour market. I won't do too much detail on that, but yeah, thank you very much for your input. And I always find it interesting to see that some of these issues are truly universal, whether I'm speaking from Luxembourg or yourself in India, Australia, New Zealand, whatever it is. What is the profile of your mentors, basically? What is there? What do you find to be their sort of inspiration and motivation to join in on your mission, basically?
Well, normally there are people who would like to give back to society in some way, right? And when they come in as speakers, for instance, in those high-level talks, and they prepare something that they're good at, and it's like a 1 hour thing, and then they're gone. And we are thinking of, how we can sort of involve them longer term. But the mentors actually give up a substantial part of their time, and their motivation really. I mean, they'll be typically people who are coming to the end of their career cycles. In a way, they've got more time, and they've got a lot of learning and experience. So they like to stay in touch. So it gives them that, and it gives them a sense of having contributed, something back to the world, which I think is their main motivation. Um, some of them really, I mean, they really feel bad when the mentors or when the fellows don't connect back with them, and we try everything. And we have, like, Jonathan can tell you perhaps more about this because he leads that. We have like an onboarding process for them. We tell them how about mentoring best practices, and how we will allow many flowers to bloom. So please, take whichever approach you would prefer. Choose what works for you and for your fellow, etc., etc. And so we are in touch with them, but it's just this consistent non-stickiness that seems to get to them. But I will say that they come back time after time, and so next year they'll be like, okay, we'll try with another fellow. So it's not as though they're completely demotivated lot. But I think it's really born out of the sense of wanting to give back, which is what motivates. And in terms of their profile, I mean, I can run quickly through some of them just for, I mean, somebody will have been like an agriculturist for most of their life. Somebody will have been working in international development for water. Another person will have been working on the rights of sort of women and queer people. Somebody else will have done children's rights all their lives. So there are people who've done various development roles or managerial roles. There's someone who has been a trainer in the corporate sector. So people like that, and all of whom have had illustrious careers. Very often they've studied, in the best of institutions, including international institutions. So they come with like solid experience. So they're not just anyone.
We've interviewed quite a few of the mentors and the fellows about why the connection is breaking down, and for some, it's to do with their confidence. Many of them, I think, it's to do with their confidence of the fellows, and even the mentors, think, oh, they haven't, the fellow hasn't called me. Perhaps they don't value what I have to offer, or I'm not very good as a mentor, and so on. So there's lack of confidence on both sides. And I think, as Tristan said, reminding people of the importance of the connection is, one route. through it. We've also tried changing the medium, the channel. Some of, as Madhuri said, some of the fellows are not so confident in English. So, if you use certain channels like WhatsApp and so on, it might not be the best. And then maybe just a telephone call might be better, or some other medium. So we've experimented a bit with that to see if that makes a difference. And don't think it's made that much of a difference. We have people, obviously, some fellows in quite extreme situations, and sometimes that is just such a distraction. They're trying to cope with some crisis at home or at work or with a family member, and so you just got to give them more time. And they take a month or two off, and then they come back, hopefully. But it is really tricky how to promote and maintain these relationships. And I think Tristan talked about the need for that sort of maintenance, just routine maintenance, and making sure that the people on both sides are supported. They've got a lifeline. If they have a problem, they can contact the Goa School office and get some sort of advice. Sometimes we've paired buddies, sort of like a buddy system of mentors, so that the needs of each particular fellow can be addressed in their unique way. Someone coming in there? I think I can hear a voice.
That sounds really good. So I've got actually two questions, if I can, before we move on. The first one is, to what extent do you deliberately talk about social capital, or the importance and value of relationships, if you don't want to use the term social capital, and encourage both the fellows and the mentors to really see the value and understand how relationships function, both to help people to get by and to get ahead, how important and valuable they are? So that's the first question. Perhaps you can answer the second one at the same time, which is, like, to what extent, you talked a bit about self-development being very, very important. To what extent do you focus that self-development and capacity strengthening on aspects that would help people to form those relationships and to maintain them? So things like effective listening, empathy, those kinds of self-development and skill developments that can really help to facilitate the formation of those relationships between the fellows and the mentors. So two questions there, if you can.
Madhuri.
Well, I'll start with the second. Yeah, I'll start with the second one, because I can tell you that we give everybody a pretty harsh feedback, because in the beginning they all want to tell their story, and then they're not listening when the other stories are coming out, right? So we absolutely make sure that everybody is listening and attentive to the whole group, right? And so effective listening and empathy is absolutely on the agenda. I think where the challenge lies is, you see, when you're talking about empowering, say, a group of Adivasi women's, Adivasi meaning tribal communities, then it's much easier for them to understand the concept of how you can stick together and claim your rights. And so there is a certain intrinsic value or a benefit in grouping together, because it gives you more strength, right? It's like that whole thing of, you can't break one twig, but if you bundle them all up, harder to break, right? But these are people who are not in the same community, and they're dispersed across the country. So we do encourage, like, so for example, every month we have something called a catch batch, which is a meeting where we get everybody together and we sort of talk to them about what they've been doing, and make sure they talk to each other and all of that. And it's a friendly, lovely conversation, and we try and put in a little bits of learning. So for instance, on Saturday we're going to have a call with everybody and talk to them about, along with a fellow who did well in one of our previous batches, about how they can get the best out of their mentoring relationships. So we do activities like that throughout the year that they're not actually here in Goa.
Perhaps I can jump in. There's a slide coming out later, which I can talk to you right now, I think, where at the end of the immersion week, the fellows give their sort of feedback about how it went. And so one of them got 4 quotes here, right? One is the body language of the mentors encouraged engagement. So the fellows have been sort of seeing how people are relating to each other, and they just see that the body language is much more open and encouraging of connection. Another fellow said, doing tasks together helped us cooperate. It's just the way the activities are designed fosters that level of cooperation, right? So the fellows are getting exemplary behavior, if you like, that sort of see the role modeling happening from the mentors and the people who share in the discussions with them, right? A third one said, I learned that even if you're facing challenges, seek help. You're not alone. You can easily reach out and get help. Yeah, so that the fellows are discovering actually the value of cooperation, collaboration, and just bringing people in, not trying to achieve everything on your own. And the last one says, one of the most spellbinding things I learned was how to build new connections that would benefit both parties involved. So it's sort of, I'm okay, you're okay, let's work together, and we can create something bigger than the sum of the parts. So I like those quotes because they sort of take the lid off the box a bit, and you can see some of the dynamics happening within that immersion program that the fellows are finding helpful. They're learning how to work together with other people, as Tristan's question was asking, really.
Yeah, precisely. And certainly distance presents a challenge for certain kinds of outcomes of social capital coming about. You can't exactly borrow a cup of rice from somebody if they're on the other side of the country. But then focusing more on acknowledging the really important benefits that can still come, even if there's distance. The things you've been talking about, the advice, the guidance, the information, the introduction to opportunities, like all of those things are still just as possible on the other side of the country as they are if you live next door. And maybe just helping people to really focus in and understand that those benefits still exist, even if you feel like you're a long way away from your mentor, might be a bit of extra motivation to continue to maintain those relationships.
Right.
Yep.
We will try, right.
So I'm mindful of time. Did you want to get onto the second part?
Yeah, so thanks everyone for ideas and pointers, contributions. We'll be happy to hear from you even after this call, right? The Goa School is growing up, it's year 4, and we're beginning to seek resources outside so that we can expand. And for that, we need the proof of concept. We need to be able to convince new donors that the methodology we're using is effective, right? And so this second section of the presentation is really about how we're trying to measure change and articulate that and present it to prospective donors who will help us expand our work, right? So this slide shows the concept, right? From the changes in the self that we just talked about to them beginning to influence behavior of the fellows and enable them to create change outside home, right? So it's very much the starting inside, and then the ripples of hope will go out, right? So we need to be able to prove that there's been some sort of reduction in social inequity as a result of the program. So we have, asked that question about, are we making progress? And if so, how? It's very complex, particularly as the change moves outside the home. There's so many other factors, and attributing any change to what we've done is extremely difficult, right? What we tend to do is interview people involved, right, and ask them why, what's changed, and can they attribute it to anything that we've done, or how and why did that change happen? And those tend to be qualitative stories, and quite hard to aggregate and quite hard to put in boxes because the changes are so many and so different. Right, so next slide, please. It's changing the slides. Madhuri, can you click us on to the next slide? Great. Okay. So you see the main activities that Madhuri described on the left-hand side. There's sort of four main activities. There's the sort of immersion program, which is 1 week long, and then the mentorship, which is usually 1 year long, and then the graduates join this Hive Mind, which is a fantastic website or chat group, WhatsApp chat group, where ideas and examples of great practice are shared. It's really thriving. And then we have the talks, formal talks, which are there to obviously inspire people about different aspects of sustainable development. So those are the things that we actually do on the left side. And then the kind of changes we hope to see are there on the right side. So you need to go from activity to outputs to outcomes. And we hope to see strengthening of networks, bridging communications, collaborations, peer support, and some bonding, and higher levels of participation in civic life, right? So those are the sort of wider changes in the external environment, but very difficult, as I was saying, very difficult to attribute back to those activities on the left side of the diagram, right? So that's our hypothesis, that if we do those activities, those changes will happen. And we think change results from that. But where is the evidence? And how can we find it and gather it? Next slide, please. Right. And here are some of the, the outcomes that we've seen. So one of the fellows started her own organization called Heads Held High, which was a fantastic initiative in her community. Another one, Katerina, we're calling her here, she joined Accenture in Bangalore. And Accenture, as you may know, is a big management consultancy. So that gave her the opportunity to influence so many projects and her peers within the organization that's deployed by both government and private sector. So it's a very strategic appointment that she got. And a lot of our fellows look for help in finding jobs, employment, not just for the income, but for opportunities like this. But conversely, there are two less successful examples. So Amanda lost her mother to a drug overdose, and that was a massive distraction. All the ideas she had for projects went out the window while she dealt with the issues arising from her mother's passing. And Rashid dropped out of the program. We just lost him. Don't know. He attended the first week. The first week, the immersion is a hugely attractive event. As Madhuri said, for many of the fellows, the first time that they're traveling to Goa, it's a very glamorous place. They got a flight there and so on. And it's a big draw. So we have no shortage of applicants. But after that, some fellows are less interested in the mentorship. It's a very different approach, and maybe they're distracted like Amanda. Or maybe they just don't find it a useful approach, mentorship. So there we've got two quite good examples of what we might call success, and two perhaps less successful, certainly perhaps failure. And so when we look at those sort of stories, we ask ourselves, well, are we successful? Here is 50% success rate according to this listing. And how do we replicate that success? Because they're all so different, these stories. It's not like getting 5 of the same and saying, okay, this is what we're doing. So we need to really understand how change is happening. And next slide, please. Okay, so in order to see if there's any change, we've developed this matrix of indicators, right? And there are 42 of them. So we have a bit of a blizzard of information, so many data points, right? So for each of the 4 main activities, like the immersion program, the mentorship, and so on, we've got 6 indicators for each of those. And 3 of them are qualitative and 3 of them are quantitative, right? And similarly for the stakeholder types, the fellows, the mentors, and the advisors and so on, we have a set of indicators to see what is the impact of the program on them, because they want to give back. They are often surprised by the stories they hear from the fellows, and it broadens their own perspective on society in India, right? We've got indicators about the governance of the organization, about our visibility. So there's lots of data, right? We have data, after each activity, we're collecting data about who participated and how they participated. We do an annual survey, a sort of baseline, and we get different reports. So there's lots of data. And if anything, we're getting a bit lost in it as it's beginning to come in now. We've just put in these systems in the last few months, so we're drowning. Next slide, Madhuri, please. But so here you see the top line is the change chain. We think if we do the activities, we will expand the thinking of the fellows and the mentors, and ultimately that will result in action for change, for positive change, right? And then with all our set of indicators, we're trying to measure that change. So first up, the most easy ones are the statistics on the different activities. How many immersion camps, how many people participated, how many people came to share and give lectures or discussions and so on. Then the expanded thinking, we have a baseline on attitudes, which I'll show you a bit more in a minute. But ultimately, the action for change, which is the sort of impact level we're looking at, we use storyboards. So the stories I just shared about Katerina and so on, Rashid, they're the stories which take us through the process of change over a longer time period, right? And so we've got some good storyboards. We've got this baseline on attitudinal thinking, and we've got the stats on the activities. Easiest to count the activities, the number of fellows completing a course and so on. Attitudinal change is much more difficult to measure, and change in the community is so complex and difficult to attribute. We haven't really got so far with that yet. Next slide. Let's have a look at one of the baselines, Madhuri. Yeah, okay. So this is a baseline survey. Sample size about 80 fellows, mentors, and speakers, right? And it provides a bit of evidence of self-development, such as if fellows have undertaken further study or career advancement and so on. So there's one there about self-analysis and personal development. 21 respondents felt that this was something that had been achieved, right? They were supported with that. On the expanded thinking, you'd see the sort of evidence there where they're talking about critical thinking, developing an inquiring mind. So 19 of our respondents and mentors felt that this is something that the program had achieved, right? Less so on the interpersonal communication. But this has been our approach. These sort of attitudinal baselines is our way of taking the pulse and seeing if our program has actually delivered on this change chain, right? So the questions are, if you like, predetermined, sort of normative and a bit prescriptive. We've also tried using baselines which are open and said, what changes do you think resulted from this? But the answers are so very different. It's difficult to then aggregate them into a set of indicators, right? And we also wonder whether the questions, which are quite focusing, most of them are focusing quite a lot on the personal impact, the change in the fellow's own self analysis and their thinking about their values and their attitudes and so on. Maybe the heavy emphasis on those are distracting people from change at the wider level. So if the fellows get the impression that we're only interested in their own attitudinal change, then they take their eye off the ball of the wider context in which they're operating. And next slide. There's another one. Yeah. Okay, right. So there's also a set of questions around attitude, but also it seems working on community change there, which got quite a low scoring. And it might be just that we're capturing results to this questionnaire early in the process of the change chain. So as the fellows are still working through their thinking, their values, their attitudes, and so on, the next step would be to step outside and see what they can do in their household or in the community around them. And so it might take time for us to see results at the external level. So you see, my engagement has been quite low, just very low results on those sort of external factors. Right. And Jane, next slide. So beyond the statistics about the activities and then the attitudinal surveys and baseline, we have these storyboards. And I talked these through earlier, where the fellows were describing some of the changes that they felt happened actually during the immersion program, where they were seeing the role modeling by Madhuri's team and by the speakers who come and engage with them during that week, right? Just about how they collaborated, how they behaved together. So there's quite good stories. And then, there are stories which begin to talk about change at the external level. I think Madhuri gave us a case study at the end of her section earlier, right? So we call these most significant change stories, and it's a methodology that has been used quite widely, where you ask an individual what is the most significant change that happened as a result of this program, right? And you'll hear stories. And then the next question is about why you think this is the most significant. And that opens up a whole discussion about what you think is important, what you value ultimately. And it helps us understand, how people's values are evolving as they experience the program and the activities that they engage in after the program, right? They tend to be qualitative and therefore difficult to aggregate. But I guess the question is, how can we tell if our performance is getting better or worse over time when every story is so different? So that's really the next question. Next slide. How can we better measure change in social capital generated by the Goa School, right? If you look at the literature that Tristan and his team are putting together, you look at participation rates, governance, attitudes to safety in the community, and so on, right? But how can we adapt those sort of indicators to what we're doing? Well, social capital isn't really our end goal. We understand that it's really very much a prerequisite for cooperation, collaboration in the community, and therefore, wider external change. So we know it's really important. It's somewhere in the outcomes level, I think. How do we measure that bonding, the bridging, the linking? A lot of the fellows are very interested in the networking, particularly how their mentors can help connect them to people who can benefit their lives or influence change they're trying to achieve, right? So as network analysis, we can look at levels of trust, engagement, participation, right? But how can we move forward? We need to be able to put something on paper as that proof of concept to show donors at the most practical level to bring the resources to enable us to continue. But also, we need to be able to not just prove, but to improve. And so where's the evidence to show us which of our activities, which of our investments of time are yielding the best results, right? So questions out there. We're looking for pointers, ideas, suggestions, but we're also happy to take your questions. Thanks.
Great, that's wonderful. So either post in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and we'll call upon you to unmute yourself. But if you're not in a position to do so, just let us know in the chat. We'll happily read out the questions or comments on your behalf.
Thank you.
So again, I might start first if I can. Jonathan, I really love the way that you laid it out as the initiatives shifting the attitudes and beliefs that then shifts, of course, the actions of the individuals. This, of course, lines up perfectly with behavior change theories, and it's clearly the way in which it works. But it's that final piece, isn't it? The like, how do we evaluate the outcomes that occur in people's lives, and how can we try and assess the causality of the program in influencing or impacting those outcomes in people's lives? And the first thing I thought is perhaps there's an intermediary step that could be evaluated because the big change in people's lives, it's a little bit like trying to evaluate the impact of a particular program on GDP. Lots of things impact GDP. How can we assess one particular variable in that particular outcome? And so perhaps like thinking about the way social capital works, of course, it is the values and attitudes and beliefs of the individuals that shapes the nature of their actions towards others, that then contributes, those actions contribute towards those major outcomes that you're talking about. So perhaps that intermediary step, the actions of individuals, is the part that could be evaluated because there is a direct causal link there between the attitudes, values, beliefs of the individual and their actions. Now, just because there aren't actions doesn't mean you haven't changed their attitudes and beliefs. But if there are actions, then they're much better placed in order for those actions to contribute towards the outcomes you're interested in. So perhaps that's the thing that can be measured.
Right. Okay. Are there actions, and what has motivated them?
Yeah, so I'm thinking quite specifically about their actions, like how often do they build and maintain relationships? How often do they help others? How often do they make social introductions? How often are they providing social support? These quite tangible actions of individuals that then through reciprocity and the give and take of relationships then contributes towards what we know is, of course, beneficial outcomes for themselves and the other person in their communities.
And in your experience, Tristan, how do you actually go and assess the actions? Is it through interviews, or other things that we can actually measure quantitatively?
Potentially both. I think the challenge here is that social capital exists for everybody, regardless of whether they know about it and think about it or not. And I've been playing around with this idea of a distinction between being social capital passive, which is what most people do every day. They have relationships and they are really important and valuable to them, but they don't think too much about them. They don't deliberately build them and maintain them and so forth. And so there is a challenge there of, again, still separating out what people already had before entering into the program and what they improved or changed as a result of being in the program. And so those qualitative methods, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I'm biased, but the qualitative methods may be better at identifying the change by asking people, like how often did you help people before and how often would you help people now? I mean, that's overly simplistic, of course, but it may get at that change that's occurred.
Yeah. I think, as you said, many are passive, and it's sort of implicit in their values. So helping people articulate those values, helping them understand how important they are. As you said right back at the beginning, reminding people that these things are important might help them articulate them more clearly. Right? They don't know what.
And also, absolutely. And perhaps also there's two kind of big buckets of things that could be evaluated. One is how people are creating and shaping and utilizing the opportunities for these kinds of social actions to occur. And then the other one is how they're shaping those inclinations, or I like the word predispositions towards doing these kinds of things, because it's all well and good to want to help people and to want to give and support and so forth. But if you're not connected and you're not forming and developing those opportunities for it, then the potential is pretty limited. So perhaps there's two kind of big, broad buckets there that could be evaluated separately, or not separately exactly, but differently.
Mm. Helpful.
Yeah, I think that's quite a thoughtful way of putting it. So thank you for that.
And we've got a comment or a question in the chat when you're ready as well.
Yeah, shoot.
Marcel, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask it yourself. How about I read it on your behalf, but feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to follow up. So in this world of mistrust and the context of governance and protecting boundaries, how do you equip or create an awareness, the mentees and mentors, in navigating this terrain, considering that the mentees are on the younger side, and of course the fellows are more, I guess the fellows are on the younger side and the mentors are more on the older side, I guess.
Yeah. Madhuri, thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually central to what we do, in the sense that the way a lot of us grow up is to value what happens inside the family and to make sure that we're taking care of everyone who's in the family. And we literally don't think about our neighbors. And we literally don't think about what we do as a community as soon as you step out of the door. So if you think about cleanliness, just as an example, or littering, we clean our houses up. We just throw it outside the front door, and then somebody else's business to clean up. The government will come by and sweep it, right? Very little example. But at the end of the day, what we talk about is that you can't keep doing this, because then every time you go out, you're going to have to navigate bundles of litter that are not going to go anywhere, right? I mean, it's just a metaphor for life. So you can't just say, I'm taking care of myself and my own, because you will get crowded out in the end. And and therefore you have to participate, you have to step out, you have to take more responsibility for, I mean, it's just like a math thing. You just help them run that model for a little longer, and then what happens, and then what happens. And then people just realize that, that you've got to do it. And then, I mean, and then once you realize you've got to do it, then you can choose the points at which you engage, right? Depending on your interest, depending on what you want to sort out. So you might want to sort out one particular garbage heap that's across from your home. But you can actually also lend your voice to other people's struggles. You can, provide strength. You can go to talks. So when we talk about change making within the program, this is actually the point that we start with. We can't allow everything to around us in community life, or say in the country or in the state that we're in, to disintegrate, because then it will ensure that we disintegrate too. So once you marry those two things, and you do it through various examples, then you get more nodding heads in the room, and people start talking about these interconnected problems, etc., and how they would like to change them. And then, like, either there's somebody in the group that wants to work on the street, and somebody else wants to do something. And these are all things that touch their lives. Right? And so, and then they work out maybe how they could collaborate. So actually the discussions are very, very inspiring. And they come up with stuff that I wouldn't have thought of myself. Absolutely. So I think the only way, I mean, we can't equip everybody 100% to answer your question, but we definitely get them started on that process.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I saw a comment from Vivek Kumar, who said insightful, but maybe you'd like to elaborate a bit. What did he find insightful, and how might we share it more widely? Vivek, are you there? Can you come on?
They're on YouTube, so they're not going to be able to hear immediately. There's a little bit of a delay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I did prompt in the chat to see if there's anything further that they'd like to add. So we'll see if anything comes up.
Yeah.
I do think we have to thank technology a lot in the way that it's developed, because it really allows us to talk to people from everywhere, and also to keep all of our fellows and mentors connected. And I did say earlier that we started in the middle of COVID. COVID sort of just landed on us, and we thought we've got everything ready to go and to launch. And if we don't do it now, we might never. And so we just went with it, and it was amazing because you could have so many people on Zoom and on YouTube, etc., etc. And you can just create community so easily. So it's a marvelous thing.
It absolutely is. And we're still learning how to use it most effectively to facilitate these kinds of connections. But the more we can embrace it and the more we can figure out how to make use of it for these kind of purposes, the better. All right. So does anybody have any final questions or comments? If you do, you'll have to get them in quickly. Otherwise, we might look to wrap up shortly.
Sure.
Feel free to land on our website, which is the goaschool.org, and to connect with us through that website or on our social media channels, etc. We're on LinkedIn, and we're on Facebook, and we're on Instagram, I believe. So if you find us there, you'd like to talk to us, or maybe you'd like to participate and join in as a speaker or a mentor. We have mentors from all over the world. So let us know.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So Madhuri or Jonathan, do you have any final comments or thoughts to share before we end?
Well, I thank everyone for coming online and participating. And if you're picking up a recording, thanks very much for doing that. We are really interested to connect with you, of course, because that's the way the world works. Let's join hands and collaborate as much as we can. So thanks for that. Madhuri, anything from you?
Yes, thank you. It's been a great opportunity and great learning for us as well. Thank you, Tristan.
Great.
And
Thanks, Tristan.
Thanks, everyone. I'm seeing lots of positive comments coming up in the chat as well, which is great to see. Our webinar series continues next week. We've got a presentation next week about a community cafe in California and the way in which it's going about building social capital. So details are on our website. Hope you can join us for that one.
Thank you.